Adam, Brandon, and everyone else who's worked so hard here at FreedomWorks to contribute to this forum, for allowing us to use this space. They always do a great job. Today we're going to specifically focus on wait times and access to community care, and so we have three great witnesses with us. Mr. Darren Selnick. Darren, you are in our upper right corner, I believe, so you might want to nod your head or something. Mr. Steve Cooper, who's in our upper left-hand corner, remotely, and Mr. Grant Moody. Grant, you're center middle low. So we're grateful to have all of you with us. They're going to talk about specific issues. Given the seriousness of this matter, I invited Veterans Administration Secretary Dennis McDonough to join us today so we could have a direct dialogue about the problems many of our constituents are facing and identify solutions. We made it clear to him that this was not a beat down session, but it was going to be a question and answer session, get information, but he chose, unfortunately, not to accept my invitation. But in case he does show up, I mean, we've set up a chair for him in case he does happen to wander in. Fortunately, the witnesses, however, are going to provide us a substantive dialogue, and hopefully the issues we raise can be addressed by Congress in the coming months. I hear regularly from veterans in my congressional district about the bureaucratic difficulties that they face at the Veterans Administration, from excessive wait times for appointments to delayed referrals for community care to sheer incompetence on the part of VA administrators. One veteran from Mesa, Arizona, who suffers from extreme PTSD and other medical conditions, had an appointment in May 2022 for a critical condition. The VA canceled and rescheduled his appointment 7 times, each occurring several weeks after the previous date. Finally, the constituent reached out to my office for assistance, and we were able to schedule an appointment for August 2nd, more than 2 months after the initially scheduled appointment. But his story doesn't end there. During his August 2nd appointment, the VA scheduled a follow-up appointment for him on September 21st. I'm sure you can guess the outcome at this point. The appointment was ultimately canceled, and he awaits his next appointment October 11th, which he anticipates to be rescheduled then. While I'm glad we could help this gentleman, at least to some extent, veterans should not have to get a congressional office involved to receive the care they need. There was another veteran from Chandler, Arizona, who was seen at the VA in 2021 after suffering from fatigue and nosebleeds. Based on the blood work done by the VA, they assured him that he did not have cancer. Because the VA was unable to diagnose the cause, he was referred to a cancer center nearby and was immediately diagnosed with blood cell cancer. He was told by the VA that the only option to be seen and treated for his cancer was to be seen at the VA in Seattle, Washington. And he's from Chandler, Arizona. This veteran only received community care and treatment for his cancer in Phoenix after I sent a letter to Secretary McDonough about his case. This is not how the VA is supposed to work, and I would have expected Secretary McDonough to agree with that, and we could have talked about substantive remedies that might help our veterans. These stories are not just from my district are not unique, and I haven't told you nearly more than a fraction of the stories we hear. Today we'll hear from other members of Congress, and I thank all of them for coming, changing their schedules so they can be here for this forum today. Our witnesses today understand these issues better than anyone, as they have experienced them in their own lives. In 2018, Congress passed and President Trump signed into law the VA Mission Act, legislation that gave veterans more choice over where they could access medical care, whether at their VA facility or from a provider in their community. While the VA Mission Act attempted to address some of the issues that we will hear about today, the Biden administration and Secretary McDonough need to do better at implementing the reforms. Last week, during a Senate Veterans Affairs Committee hearing, Secretary McDonough refused to address why the department chose to shut down its popular link on the VA website outlining the VA Mission Act, and instead directed veterans to a new link labeled Choose VA. The department also announced last October that it would close the VA's Office of Community Care and start designing a new integrated access and care coordination model. Additionally, under the Biden administration, the VA is moving to shift additional appointments and services to telehealth. But as we will hear more from one of our witnesses today, the VA is implementing the change in a way that could negatively impact care for veterans and reduce credible eligibility for community care. This administration has shown time and time again that they will not support community care, but refuses to explain why. This Congress, I introduced the Veterans Healthcare Freedom Act, which would ensure that America's veterans have greater access to the health care they need and deserve. This bill removes barriers to private health care by allowing veterans to access primary, specialty, and mental care at non-VA facilities and outside of their corresponding Veterans Integrated Service networks. This is the next step in the right direction for getting veterans the best possible care. Today, we will hear first from our witness, Darren Selnick. Mr. Selnick is a former senior advisor to the Secretary of the VA during the Trump administration. Prior to his time at the VA, Mr. Selnick was the Veterans Affairs Advisor at the Domestic Policy Council at the White House. We will then hear from Mr. Steve Cooper. Mr. Cooper is a veteran who retired from the Army in 2007. He resides in Chandler, Arizona, and serves as a member of my Veterans Advisory Council in Arizona District 5. Mr. Cooper was instrumental in breaking the Phoenix VA scandal story in 2014 and won a landmark lawsuit against the Phoenix VA for their failure to diagnose and treat his prostate cancer. Finally, we will hear from Mr. Grant Moody. Mr. Moody is a fourth-generation veteran, a former F-18 fighter pilot, and served his country for over a decade on active duty. He resides in the northern suburbs of San Antonio and is a member of Congressman Roy's Veterans Advisory Group. Witnesses will each have 5 minutes to deliver their opening statements, and then members will also have 5 minutes to ask questions. And I look forward to hearing the statements from the witnesses and the comments and questions from the members who are with us today. Again, I thank each of you for being here. And with that, Mr. Selnick, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, and please proceed.
Thank you, Representative Biggs and members of the Congressional Forum. I appreciate the opportunity to testify at today's forum on addressing veterans' healthcare issues at the Department of Veterans Affairs and in the community. Your leadership on this is critical. My testimony today reflects, as indicated, my experience working on the Mission Act, both at the VA as a senior advisor and at the White House on the Domestic Policy Council. VA facility wait times are inaccurate and misleading, which can lead to delayed care for veterans, causing negative health consequences or even death, as happened in the Phoenix VA Medical Center scandal in 2014. The Mission Act was a promise that this would never happen again, but that promise is being broken. First, VA announced in October 2021 they were decommissioning the Office of Community Care. Plus, they shut down the Mission Act website, making it harder for veterans to access information regarding their healthcare options and community care eligibility. Last June, the VA Secretary implied that he wanted to roll back VA access standards. He said demand for healthcare has increased more intensively for care in the community than for care in the direct system, and told senators, my hunch is that we should change access standards. So why would VA want to restrict community care? The answer came from VA's HVAC testimony last July, when they said if care provided in the community continues on its current upward trajectory, certain VA medical facilities may not be able to sustain workload to operate in their current capacity. VA's problems with providing accurate wait times are shown in the AFP Foundation FOIA documents. Key findings include: 1, denying community care referrals based on clinical appropriateness; 2, waiving wait time access standards without veterans' consent; 3, overriding providers and veterans on deciding best medical interest; 4, using patient indicated date to misrepresent wait times; and 5, neglecting to advise veterans of their community care eligibility. The problem with VA's calculation of average wait times is that they do not follow the community care regulation, which states VA cannot schedule an appointment within 20 or 28 days of the date of request unless a later date has been agreed to by the veteran. Inaccurate wait times deny veterans their eligibility for community care. This includes the new wait time process VA submitted to the Federal Register on July 25th, which has 2 main problems. First, VA is incorrectly dividing veteran patients into new patient and established patient categories and using different types of start dates. All patients should have their wait times calculated the same way to ensure consistent and accurate wait times. Here are 2 examples. Northeast Phoenix VA Clinic. Primary care, new patients 71 days, established patients 10 days. Sergeant Conrad Phoenix VA Clinic. Mental health, new patients 87-day wait time, established patients 11 days. Second, the start date and end date measures are inaccurate and shouldn't be used as they artificially shorten wait times. Here's why. 1, earliest recorded date in the scheduling system. 2, the date it is scheduled to occur. There's often a delay in recording the date, and a scheduled appointment may be canceled and rescheduled by the VA. 2, from the date agreed upon between the veteran and provider for future care. Date agreed upon is only to be used for follow-up appointments after it is agreed by the veteran that data request does not work. Third, next available appointment. The problem with next available appointment is that it's a theoretical appointment, not a real appointment with a start and end date. The correct way to calculate VA average wait times is start with the date of request and end with the date the appointment is completed. Now, community care wait times are long. This is due to VA not following the 2019 community care policy of processing requests in 2 business days. Instead, VA is adding additional steps to the referral coordination initiative. The solution is simply go back to following 2019 policy. VA's review of access standards. Although VA says it is not changing access standards, it is instead proposing a Trojan horse, incorporating telehealth availability into determinations regarding eligibility based on the designated access standards. VA rejected this in 2019 because it can be used to game the system as a way to gut access standards and reduce community care eligibility. Here are my 3 recommendations to improve VA healthcare. 1, pass ranking member boss gap status with the existing access standards included. This will provide veterans with a guarantee and certainty on their ability to choose community care when facility wait times are too long. 2nd, pass Representative Biggs' Veterans Healthcare Freedom Act. This will improve veterans' access to care by giving them, instead of the VA, the choice of which healthcare providers they want, both VA and community. And 3rd, educate all veterans and staff on the requirements of the Mission Act and the VCCP regulation per Section 121. In conclusion, as VA goes forward, it must change its culture and become veteran-centric. As General Bradley said, we are dealing with veterans, not procedures, with their problems, not ours. I look forward to working with Representative Biggs and all members of the Congressional Forum to achieving what is best for veterans. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Selnick. We appreciate that. And I would just ask everybody in the room if you wouldn't mind silencing your phones or turning them off, because that gives us some interference. But with that, we're going to go to my constituent, Mr. Cooper, Mr. Steve Cooper.
Good afternoon, Congressman Biggs and your colleagues. In 2010 and 2011, I struggled to get care at the Phoenix VA for pain in my rectum and stomach issues. Eventually, I saw a nurse practitioner who presented herself as a doctor. My lawyers later determined her PhD was from the diploma mill. She found my prostate to be large and asymmetrical. When I asked her what I can do about it, she replied nothing. So I assumed my prostate was just like my nose, large and asymmetrical. And she didn't order any tests, nor did she refer me to a urologist. A year later, I was able to finally be seen by a doctor at the Phoenix VA who was from Pakistan, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I hate this job." At any rate, he saw that I had an enlarged prostate and asked where my PSA results were. I thought to myself, PSA, public service announcement. He then explained the PSA, and it should have been ordered. And when I saw the nurse practitioner, when I had the enlarged prostate, the results of my PSA was 50, when the normal range is less than 3. He then referred me to the infamous Dr. Mobley, a urologist at the Phoenix VA. It was incredibly difficult to get an appointment. When he finally got me in for the biopsy, it was barbaric to say the least. The room was disheveled, blood and fecal matter everywhere, and Dr. Mobley had pillow marks on his face from sleeping. He was an hour late to the biopsy. He then proceeded to do the biopsy without sedation, and 1 hour later I was in the ER losing consciousness from bleeding. The results of the biopsy came back and had a Gleason score of 4 at all 12 cores, and a stage 4 disease. Dr. Mobley then told me he was sure my cancer had spread throughout my body, which it had, and he stated that he had no treatment options to offer, and hospice would call me Monday morning as I had 6 to 12 months to live. Moreover, the scans he wanted done would take 3 to 6 months to get scheduled, and then it'd be 3 additional months before I would actually get back to see him. I started to do the math, and at that moment I realized I would die if I stayed at the VA. By the way, hospice never called. At any rate, I sought a second opinion in the private sector that same day. My private sector doctor not only ordered all my scans that day, he had me in surgery a few weeks later, radiation a few months after that, and the private sector doctor turned a death sentence into what will be 10 years cancer-free this December. About 3 months later, Dr. Mobley from the Phoenix VA called me and asked if I had scheduled the scans. I replied no. Since seeing you, not only have I had my scans done, my prostate removed, started anti-hormone therapy and radiation. My PSA is now undetectable. He then asked, what? And then he asked, how? My response was simple. The private sector doctors who cared saved my life. So that was 2010 to 2014. A few months ago, I received a call from the Phoenix VA because my private doctors diagnosed me with severe sleep apnea. They forwarded their findings to the VA. Well, guess what? The same thing all over again. I went to the private sector and had everything done, CPAP machine in hand, 2 months before the VA would even schedule my very first appointment to start the process. So that led me to begin looking up wait times and talking to fellow veterans and looking at data from the VA's own website. And I won't read it, but I don't know if you have the handout, but basically the wait times are insane. For example, GI procedures are 126 days here in Phoenix to be seen. Another one that's outstanding is cardiology, 48 days. And the list goes on and on. Sleep medicine is 123 days currently. So in conclusion, after these takeaways, the wait time issue is back. Pattern of practice of scheduling, canceling, and rescheduling is back, and veterans are being denied access to care in the community. I hope you'll all never quit in this fight until we know that our veterans have timely access to quality health care in the private sector that they've earned defending our nation. Thank you all.
And now we'll turn to you, Mr. Moody, for your testimony.
Well, thank you, Congressman Biggs, and thank you all for your time and your interest in making the VA more responsive and accountable for our veterans. My background, I spent 10 years on active duty as a Marine officer with deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. I left active duty in 2013, but remained a reserve officer and still remain a reserve officer to this day. In late last year, I had a back issue that quickly became, severe in terms of lower back pain. I went to my primary care manager on the civilian side, which I saw him the next day. And then I tried to initiate on the VA side. I did that because I had a service-connected disability medical issue with my back. And rather than having to pay out of my HSA account on the civilian side, I wanted to leverage my VA benefits and have the VA be responsible and help me with that expense. It took me 10 days on the VA side to meet with my primary care manager versus the 1 day on the civilian side. My civilian primary care manager scheduled an MRI in 8 days. Meanwhile, the VA took 43 days to schedule an MRI. My VA primary care manager actually tried to point me to the emergency room at the VA hospital here in San Antonio. And I didn't think that was, a wise use of medical resources and pushed back on that and wanted to continue down the process of using the actual appointment system and seeing neurology through an appointment. It wasn't until Congressman Chip Roy engaged in this that I actually, then received an appointment a couple days later. The sad thing is this wasn't about providing care for myself, because the reality is I had other options here. I had civilian health care, but there's a lot of other veterans out there who don't have that option, who don't have, a congressman that they can call who's going to engage on their behalf. They don't even know who to call. They're just running into a brick wall when it comes to the VA. And so I really started keeping track of all the data, the timelines and everything, because I wanted this to be an example that I could share with Congressman Roy and with others to understand the reality of the situation on the ground with the VA. And ultimately, not about just beating up the VA, but how do we make it better? How do we make it better for our veterans and so we can take care of them and take care of their families going forward? Ultimately, I did make it through the front door bureaucracy at the VA. The pain management was going to be a 150-day wait through the VA. Ultimately, I got scheduled in 57 days through community care. Physical therapy was going to be 90 days through the VA. I ultimately got scheduled in 58 days through community care. A couple of the takeaways for me in this was that The appointment scheduling and referral process was slow and cumbersome. And veterans who miss an appointment scheduling call have really no recourse to return the phone call and get an answer, because there's so many different phone numbers, and you'll get a different number from every person you talk to at the VA. The biggest issue for me is the VA layer of scheduling and referring nullifies the value of community care, because if you still have to go in the front door at the VA, then it's still going to delay that access to care on the other side with community care. And then I think my situation further was magnified due to the holidays. The holidays potentially further delayed any of the callback scheduling and referrals. And the reality is, veterans get sick all the time. Veterans have cancer over the holidays. Veterans have, herniated discs over the holidays. And so we can't just shut down our VA hospitals for 2 weeks because of the holidays and say, we'll get back to you in the new year. So I think that's something we have to address as well. I think that this is not an isolated incident, obviously hearing from other members here on the panel, but I think that the same scenario plays out thousands of times per month for veterans around our country. And I think that, again, it shouldn't require the engagement of a member of Congress in order to get an appointment at the VA. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Appreciate all three of our panelists being here and their testimony, and I think we're all a little bit disturbed. And hopefully, I'll just ask the members of Congress sitting around the table, hopefully you each received the Phoenix VA wait times according to the VA, that sheet. If you haven't, we'll get you that copy as quickly as we possibly can. We're going to go, and I won't ask questions first. I'll save myself for the end, but we'll start here with Congressman Andrew Clyde from Georgia, after which Congressman Bob Good from Virginia.
Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Biggs, for putting this forum together. I think it's very important. I do not believe that the majority has given us enough time to discuss issues of importance like this to our nation's veterans. I'd like to focus my remarks today on our veterans' access to care and to their choices. Our policy should be centered on the veteran and not on red tape, in my opinion. As a combat veteran myself, with 11 years active, 17 reserve, including 3 deployments into Iraq and Kuwait, I understand the importance of quality health care and accountability within the VA. Both my father was a veteran, World War II veteran, Korean War veteran. My brother was also a veteran. So, I understand what it means. One of my top priorities in Congress has been advocating for the veterans in my district and nationwide by demanding more access to quality community care, transparency, and accountability. I've also made it a priority to stand up for both the veterans and those currently serving on active duty who have had their careers ruined due to President Biden's disastrous COVID vaccine mandate. Now that Biden has admitted that the pandemic is over, the vaccine mandates must be rescinded immediately. Every religious exemption must be approved right now, and as it is having a disastrous effect on both military readiness and military morale. As everyone here knows, military recruitment numbers are way down. Wait times and issues in the VA are way up. And Biden has been chipping away at President Trump's effective reforms, which expanded quality community care in the VA, including the important reforms that were passed by Congress in the Missions Act. When Congress and President Trump passed the Bipartisan Mission Act in 2018, it was a vital step to ensuring Americans who defend the United States can access quality medical care after leaving the military. However, the implementation of the Mission Act by President Biden has been a disaster, and the bureaucratic process has ramped up over the past 2 years due to his administration's priority of retaining patients within the VA instead of prioritizing what is best for the veteran. The VA, according to their own data, only covers 38% of medical procedures that our vets actually need. Community care is not more expensive and helps the VA fill gaps in their coverage. In my own district, the average wait time for our veterans to get care through the VA is between 22 and 44 days. And that is only counting the wait time from when an appointment is actually scheduled. That doesn't mean the time when you actually ask for an appointment to when you actually get an appointment. I hear from veterans all too often that it takes even longer just to schedule an appointment. Add to that the average wait time numbers provided by the VA, and you could have months of waiting for vets in my district to get the care they need. I had a vet come in my office and he said, you know, I called for an appointment in February and finally got one, just a general practitioner appointment in September. Additionally, in places like my district where drive times to VA facilities can be prohibitively long, more flexibility should be provided for access to local private practitioners. Thank you again, Congressman Biggs, for holding this important hearing, and now I would like to direct a couple of questions to Mr. Selnick. Mr. Selnick, under President Biden, keeping veterans within the VA system appears to be their top priority instead of expanding options for community care. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yes, I would. Besides anecdotal evidence from providers telling me this themselves, it's in the FOIA documents where there are specific instructions and performance measurements of reducing community care. So it's a fact.
Why do you think that is? Because that just doesn't seem like the way it should be. I mean, you know, having proper and the best care we can possibly give to our veterans, I think should be the #1 priority here, not simply keeping a veterans facility open to keep it open. I mean, is there something behind that?
Depending on who I talk to, a number of things, plus the testimony from Undersecretary of Veterans Health, Lapuz. But the bottom line is, this is mostly coming from management. And management, the community care budget and the facility budgets are two separate budgets. But each year, each facility gets its money based on how many veterans they can count as using the facility and every specialty. And as more veterans using community care and less veterans use the facility, they're concerned about how much money is going to come to their facility, and the VA management is concerned about how much money Congress is going to give to the VA facilities. So that is their major concern. It's about keeping their budgets and keeping their staff rather than having good health care. The providers themselves are actually getting in trouble oftentimes for putting veterans in the community for long wait times. And the operations have really fallen apart since COVID and not recovered. And providers tell me that some of them are telling me they're seeing as few as 6 patients a day. 6 patients a day, which is one of the reasons why their wait times are. So, I mean, that is the big problem. It is all about saving the institution and not saving the veteran.
I think they have their priorities mixed up there. I think it should be about saving the veteran.
Unfortunately, the gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Clyde. And just to point to the members, we have a timer that's right there, hard to see, perhaps.
Got it. Appreciate it.
At least for some, Mr. Clyde, I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Clyde. And now we'll go to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
Thank you, Chairman Biggs, for hosting this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses. Particularly just want to express all of our thankfulness that you're here, Mr. Cooper, and our regret for what you had to go through and the treatment that you didn't receive, and thankfulness for what you ultimately did receive. I think everybody in this room on the panel, or the congressional side at least, is a spending hawk and recognizes that our government is recklessly spending on priorities and on things that we should not be spending taxpayer money on. And what that does is makes it so difficult, even if to fund those things that are the priorities or that should be the priorities of government, because we have so overspent and put us in such a tough financial situation. But we absolutely must keep our promise to our veterans, those most deserving of honor, those most deserving of care. It is a commitment that we've made, and we've got to honor that. I have a 90-year-old father-in-law who's an Air Force veteran, who's disabled, and about a year before I got elected to Congress, so about 3 years ago, when my wife and I applied for some benefits for him for his disability through the VA, again about 3 years ago, a year before I got elected, he was turned down. We did not know at that time to try to advocate through a congressional office. As a citizen, I'd never reached out to a congressional office. We have since learned in the thousands of cases that we've worked on for veterans in my first 2 years, how the VA summarily dismisses or turns down every case automatically. whether it's to stall you, whether it's to discourage you, and we have not reapplied since, and we have some ability to take care of my father-in-law, but it was so disappointing to learn that is just what they do, because as Mr. Moody shared, and we're thankful for the help that he got by an advocate with Mr. Roy, as you shared earlier, but not everyone knows to do that. No, not everyone has their Congress member's number on speed dial. Back in April, I led a letter with the Virginia and West Virginia Republicans to the Department of VA Inspector General, and it requested the IG investigate the implementation of the Virginia Community Care Program as established by the Mission Act. I received a response from the IG sharing that the VHA has presented wait times to the public without clearly and consistently detailing the basis for their calculations. And of course, this raises concerns about their commitment to transparency from the VA officials. In an audit of the community care consults during the height of the COVID-19 lockdowns, the IG found that there were deficiencies in documenting when patients were contacted about scheduling appointments, setting consult priority levels, designating when patients could have alternative care options, and ensuring that staff training programs address those weaknesses. When I wrote the VA IG in April, the wait times for a new patient primary care visit in Charlottesville, Virginia clinic in my district was 61 days. It's been improved since I reached out down to 34 days, but that's still way off of the goal of 20 days, 70% worse than the goal of 20 days. While it seems like improvements are being made, access to care is still a big issue, and for many of us have rural districts where it's particularly the case, or when you're coming to specialty care, like Mr. Cooper referenced that he needed. And so there's so much room for improvement. We know that veterans are waiting a long time for the benefits for other than health care, but we must ensure that make sure government workers are back to work, showing up to work every day to take care of their citizens, and we end all this working, or not working, I should say, in the name of the China virus. Some veterans are happy with their care, but of course the most important thing is to make sure that every veteran has the best possible care. Mr. Selnick, according to the VA Mission Act, how should wait times properly be determined? How should they properly determine wait times under the Mission Act?
Well, for eligibility, is clear in the regulation that you need to go ahead and start from the date of request to the first available appointment. So the veteran says, hey, I need primary care. They call, and that's the date of request. Date of request, it doesn't matter if VA is not answering the phone and you leave a message. The law is very clear that veteran can check at any time eligibility for any reason, whether they actually need it, and VA has to give them a prompt answer. The regulation is not clear by calculating the average wait times, but since average wait times feed into eligibility, although they're separate, the logical way of doing it that we discussed when I was at the VA was always the start date was date of request. It's the only consistent date you can get is date of request, whether that's from the veteran or from the provider. And then it goes to when did you actually get the appointment? If VA cancels your appointment, the clock does not stop. It's to when you actually was able to see the doctor for the average calculation. And VA does play that game where they set you at 26 days, cancels you, redoes it, and stops the clock. And that's one of the reasons why we have such inaccurate wait times. So remember, every time you see a wait time that the VA provided, it's longer than what they're actually telling you. We just don't know how much.
Thank you, Mr. Selnick. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Good. And now recognize the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Mobert.
Thank you very much, Congressman Biggs. Thank you for your work in getting this forum set up to our witnesses for offering their testimony on what we must do to improve the VA healthcare system. Our great men and women in uniform and our nation's veterans put everything on the line to defend this great country and our freedoms. There will never be enough that we could do to express our gratitude. And they deserve the very best care that America has to offer. They have committed their lives to our country, and we must uphold our commitment to each and every one of them. Unfortunately, the Department of Veterans Affairs has fallen short of its own sacred mission, which is to care for him who shall be born of battle. It's up to us to hold the VA accountable. In my district, home health care workers can no longer transport veterans to their appointments. Even if those workers have valid driver's licenses, have proper insurance, instead veterans are being told they need to be driven by VA staff and volunteer drivers who of course are in very short supply. As we've heard, all of that has been diminishing since COVID. It's incredible to hear your testimony that 6 patients a day are what is being seen right now, and that this is about saving the institution, not the veteran. This is an absolute atrocity that needs to be addressed. But with this declining since COVID, we've seen many men and women who have served our country live their last days alone, die alone, not be able to see their family. And in my district, just one story that we have is where the VA failed a veteran. We continue to stand up for veterans. For instance, this family recently contacted me regarding the VA's very slow reaction to their doctor's request for the veteran's immediate open heart surgery. We got that veteran into surgery within 3 days. Both the doctor and the veteran's family indicated that my constituent could have died if he had waited any longer than that. This is absolutely unacceptable. And another example, a Silver Star veteran went 14 months for an authorization for care. Within days of opening the case, the veteran's condition turned into an emergency. We were able to escalate the case through the VA, but the amount of time and the effort this veteran had to put to get noticed by the VA is absolutely unacceptable. And how many of these veterans don't make that call? Don't call in the offices to actually open up a case and sit there and wait and suffer and have the worst of results. The fact that these veterans must wait months before receiving basic services should make everyone demand improvements to the VA. Now, Mr. Cooper, your story about how the VA healthcare system nearly cost you your life is also unacceptable. But something that is not uncommon to hear about the VA in your testimony for this forum, you highlighted egregious wait times at the VA for relatively routine care. Nearly 31 days for primary care, 34 days for PTSD treatment, 48 days to see a cardiologist, and 123 days for sleep medicine. I'll be quite frank with this. Why do Democrats, Mr. Cooper, want veterans to continue waiting months for basic care instead of allowing those veterans timely access to the best health care possible?
Yeah, that's a great question, Congresswoman, and I appreciate the question. I think it goes back to Darren's point about managers wanting to maintain the assets and the resources at the VA and their employees. And other than that, I can't come up with any other reason why.
And, we grieve with you and for just these waits. And, of course, we're doing everything that we can to improve that. Increasing access and promoting flexibility is why I'm proud to co-sponsor H.R. 2910, the Veterans Healthcare Freedom Act, sponsored by my colleague, Mr. Biggs. And then there's many other pieces of legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of as well. And over the last 20 years, the Department of Veteran Affairs has seen its annual budget increase from $40 billion to more than $240 billion. Despite this massive increase, the VA bureaucracy continues to move further and further away from its own stated mission. And this is what we are all here to address today. And thank you all so much for your time, for your service to our great country. We are just forever grateful and humbled to be in your presence today. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady, and now yield to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
There are good people who work at the VA, just as Sergeant First Class Cooper tells us of almost being killed by the folks there. I have constituents who believe that they were saved as a consequence of good care that they received. But that said, 4 out of every 5 times the phone rings in my district office in Pensacola, it is a veteran with a concern about the VA. And so these are kitchen table issues in my district, and I see time and again where people are sent all over Hell's Half Acre to get care, where people experience extreme delays that are life-threatening. And I think that the central point of this entire hearing, which I'm very grateful that we're having, was made by Lieutenant Colonel Moody. Forcing veterans to walk through the front door of the VA is the choke point of the system. That nailed it. Okay, that is the central point. And then Congressman Good gave us the diagnosis, which is that that is not a bug of the system, that is a feature of the system. And it's all to centralize power in a government agency. And so, like, here is my question to the group. Is it savable? I mean, why not abolish the VA, take all of the money that we are otherwise spending and go to any willing provider system within our communities, and then if people get bad care, they can vote with their feet, and you don't have a two-tier system of health care in this country with our veterans and with everyone else. Because like right now, we're living in a world where basically every system of health care run by the federal government is failing. In all of our communities, you're about to see a ton of doctors walk out of primary care on Medicare because Medicare and Medicaid have become so swollen with able-bodied childless adults after Obamacare that we're cutting primary care. It's at the same time of this high inflation. So I guess I'll start with you, Lieutenant Colonel Moody. Should we even work on saving this thing with the legislation that we've been discussing, or should we just rent out every building the VA owns for commercial office space and let people vote with their feet?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you for bringing this this important question to the people here. I think that I'll just say that this is a unique opportunity for our side in that I think that when you talk about spending on healthcare, we actually have an opportunity to improve outcomes for our veterans and at the same time save tax dollars, right? Whether that is going wholesale and eliminating the VA, or at least stop digging in terms of there's all these new services that are having to be added right now to the VA.
Right, but the problem is you diagnosed it. To get those services, where do you have to go? Through the front door, right?
Yep.
Or, so Sergeant First Class Cooper, I want to give you some of my time as well. I mean, do you think that this patient is savable, or should we just move on?
It's over, sir. There's no doubt about it. I had a colleague that shared that the VA is only doing about 50,000 surgeries annually. And it made me really start to think that my local hospital in Chandler does probably 50,000 surgeries annually. So at the end of the day, I'm not even convinced that the VA is truly practicing medicine. They're bouncing the veterans back and forth like the Colonel mentioned, and then eventually they either die, or in my case, we seek care in the private sector. And so my mission in my life is to fight until we know that every veteran has true access to healthcare in the private sector.
Mr. Selnick, I know the VA does a bunch of stuff outside of health. I'm speaking specifically to VA health. What is the redeeming quality of VA health that we preserve that is better advanced than in any willing provider system?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. When I was on the Commission on Care, Toby Cosgrove of the Cleveland Clinic at the time thought that the VA system was ultimately going to fail and was not redeemable. Where I differed slightly with him was centers of excellence for unique combat type treatments that the VA has more expertise in. But the bottom line is VA in its current configuration is not savable. I've spent 20 years providing it every opportunity, whether it's the Air Commission, the Mission Act, Center for Innovation, to save it. It will not save itself.
Well, let me use my final 5 seconds to say, on those centers of excellence, we have some of like the greatest trainers in the world that train world-class athletes and are now starting to open up pilot projects to be able to serve veterans in active duty, and that might be a way to meet that need. I didn't mean to cut you off, but just want a last word before I yield back to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman from Florida. I now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Norman.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having this. You know, we've got a double-edged sword. We've got an administration that doesn't care. Andrew Clyde mentioned about the COVID virus. We've got a president who actually said yesterday to get ready for the hurricane, get the COVID shot. How does that work? Let me ask Colonel Cooper and Colonel Moody and Mr. Cooper, if you were in our shoes, what taking off what Matt said, two things: defunding it, and is it savable? And secondly, why can't we get the military officers involved in this? If you were us, what would you do? And it'll start off with Colonel Moody.
Well, thanks for the question. You know, I think there's an older generation, I'll say, that you know, is once you're established within the healthcare roles at the VA and you're retired and you go down to the VA hospital and you spend all day waiting for your appointment and seeing some of your buddies or something like that, you're in a very different situation. I think that for the OIF, OEF generation who are still trying to raise a family, who still have day jobs, who have other things, I can't take 24 hours and go hang out in the ER waiting for healthcare. And so I think that there is a dichotomy there between different audiences, different generations of veterans and their flexibility around the healthcare. I mean, I'd go back to my response to Congressman Gates, though. I think, you know, the immediate steps in my mind are just to stop growing the problem. You know, we're talking about all new services that the VA needs to provide to a younger generation from OIF, OEF. Well, why can't we at least push all those new services into the private sector rather than growing the current existing bureaucracy of the VA? And then, you know, I think there's conversations. How do you break down that front door and get directly to community care rather than having to work through the existing VA? And then the ultimate question about, do we still need a VA as it exists today?
Could we get the military, the colonels, the generals, the mass military on board to, and I'm kind of sensing is just what Matt said, defund the thing and start over, at least send that message.
Well, I think there's definitely a good percentage of, you know, veterans out there who would be open to it as long as they know that they're going to still have the care that they're used to. And I think that, you know, the private sector has shown that it can do a better job providing that care than government, you know, funded healthcare, government provided healthcare.
Right. Mr. Cooper.
Congressman, thank you for the question as well. If I were healthier, I would run for Congress and fight with you all. The challenge I have is I live in Congressman Biggs' district, so I'd have to go against him. But absent that, of course, I literally would be in the trenches with you all, so I'm trying my best from here. I want to share a very short story. My surgeon, who's a urologist in the private sector, shared with me this. He said, Steve, I would never work at the VA. And I said, why? He said, I make 7 figures a year in the private sector running my business. And I think what I think about is college football coaches. If state universities can pay a college football coach 7 figures, why can't the VA then, if that's the rock star of the college, why can't they pay then the surgeon 7 figures if that's what it's going to take to save the VA? However, I don't agree with saving the VA personally. I've seen enough to where I know it's not a feasible option. We need to shut it down.
Well, that's kind of what I'm thinking, because you know, the story that y'all had, the two of you wouldn't be here, and I heard no good stories. I had 0 in my district, and so I guess it's a matter of us leading the fight to defund it. And I just want to thank all of you for your testimony. Andy, thank you for having this, and for FreedomWorks. This ought to be on Capitol Hill with everybody, 435 members present, but with the problem we've had. I yield back.
Hey, thanks, Mr. Norman. And now I'll recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Biggs. And Mr. Cooper, I think you could beat Mr. Biggs in a head-to-head.
Oh, I don't want to go with that. I've done enough.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. Mr. Selnick, I got a question for you. I got Fort Rucker in my district, and one of the things that I've been getting a lot of pushback on lately is the way the pharmacy is working. And I don't know if you guys are talking about reimbursements, but on the military base, the veterans now have to go out and give them, if they live in Troy, wherever, they got to drive to Fort Rucker, they give the prescription, and then the pharmacy makes them leave and come back a week later to pick up their meds. And a lot of these guys, like I said, they don't have transportation capabilities. So now I'm hearing the reimbursements, they're going to be different through the VA. They're not going to be using some of the small pharmacies. Have you been hearing that? I'm getting a lot of questions about that.
I've not been hearing about that directly. It wouldn't surprise me. The VA has continually tightened its control. During the Trump administration, the point was to expand customer service, expand it in a way similar to DOD, so that you can call in your prescription, you could get it to local CVS, et cetera. But once again, as we've seen with healthcare in general, VA is trying to bring everything back to its facilities and take back total control from the veteran in terms of how it provides all access and all care in all pharmaceuticals.
I just see that being a problem. We have, with Fort Rucker, I have so many Vietnam veterans. I was actually sitting in a restaurant the other night, and I had a veteran walk up to me and say, "Hey, Mr. Berry," he said, "I've been waiting on my hearing aid since the war." And I said, "Which war?" And he said, "The Vietnam War." And so within 2 weeks, we got him his hearing aids, and I think we solved 1,900 cases. But the fact that it takes an act of Congress, and we spend so much of our time and resources trying to help those veterans, which is what we want to do, obviously. But I'm kind of like Mr. Gates. I kind of think this thing may be too far gone. I don't know if the VA can be saved or not. But, you know, interesting, I have meetings from time to time with VFW, and some of the older guys, like Mr. Moody said, they kind of like that. They like the VA system. They like going to the doctor, and I think because they have plenty of time and maybe a little bored and want to see their friends. But honestly, sometimes I wonder, it seems like up here we throw more and more money at the problem, and there's less and less oversight. And so it's about protecting that bureaucracy. I have actually a facility, a VA facility, you'll find this interesting, in my district. And I was looking around, and they give me the dog and pony show, and I was trying to get to the bottom of some things, but it used to be a big hospital almost like. Now there's only 11 beds, and it's all office space, is what I'm told. I haven't been able to see all of it, but it's really very little. It's a jobs program for government employees. It has little to do with the veterans who have served, and so that's interesting. I had my wounded warrior go by the other day. He's a veteran, and he was in the hospital over there, and he says he'd been getting complaints. He said, "I've been calling the pharmacy." Members were saying, "We're calling the pharmacy, not getting answered." So he goes and sits in the lobby and calls the pharmacy at the VA and lets the phone ring and ring from his cell phone and watch them walk by the phone and not even answer. They could care less about our veterans, and that, to me, is unbelievable. We're going to continue to hold them accountable. And Moody, let me ask you one thing. What was your call sign?
Tiny.
Tiny. Okay, my brother.
6'4", 245 pounds. I played football at Navy.
Listen, I've been in the back of one of those things. I don't know how you do it at 245. They told me I was too fat to fly. I can't believe they let you fly. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding. My brother's call sign, he was an F-18 guy in the Marine Corps, Lieutenant Colonel, was Otis. And he asked me a while ago, I said, "You know a guy named Moody?" He said, "Give me his call sign, I may know him." But anyway, he retired as Lieutenant Colonel. Thank you for your service. Thank all of you for your service. And with that, Mr. Biggs, I appreciate the bill you're bringing. I'm on board. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Tiny, don't take any offense about him talking about your weight. Don't take any offense about that. Now, thanks, Mr.
None
Roy.
taken.
And we're going to yield time now to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank my friend from Arizona for holding this hearing. We shouldn't be having to hold this hearing off the Hill. We should be holding this hearing in the Capitol. There are three of us who are here who are on the Veterans Affairs Committee, Mr. Rosendale, Mr. Moore, and myself, to the best of my count. And these are the kinds of things we should be addressing there. Lord willing, if we have the gavel in January, we will do that. And this is a bit of a warm-up, if you will. And I think it's important for us to get ready for January. So I appreciate the three witnesses for providing your time here. I very much support the gentleman from Arizona's legislation. I have legislation that's similar, but focused more on direct primary care. They overlap. We're all in the same frame of mind. We need a radical change and radical reform in terms of the way we provide health care, not just for our veterans, by the way. And we're talking a lot about, how much we want to get people out into the private sector. Well, we've pretty much butchered the hell out of the private sector health care as well through an alphabet soup of miserable government regulations that now provide insurance-run health care for most Americans, which is absolutely absurd, while they pocket literally billions of dollars, making absurd profits because of government action. But it's the same problem. It's the same issue. And Mr. Gates, my friend from Florida, observed that in terms of where you're forcing people to go. You're forcing them to go through the front door of the VA, or you're forcing private citizens to go through the front door of a friggin' insurance company and call some kid in Omaha for permission of what doctor he can go to. So we need to completely reform all of this, and it starts with individuals, it starts with citizens, whether they're civilians or whether they're in the military, being able to go to the doctor of his or her choice. And if Republicans don't go on offense straight up in January saying we're going to be for patients and doctors and we're not going to be for bureaucrats at the VA or bureaucrats at insurance companies, then we should all be tossed out of office. And I mean that. And Republican leadership needs to be held to that standard. And so I got a handful of questions for the folks here. One question in particular for either Mr. Moody, and thank you for your kind words, and thanks for all you've done in your service and being a constituent. I'm very appreciative of your support. But for either Grant or Steve, what is your response to opponents of community health care who argue that non-VA providers lack the cultural competency? That's one. And two, we often hear the VA tout surveys showing more than 80% of veterans are satisfied with their health care. And three, we have, when veterans have this much trouble accessing community care because of the VA roadblocks, that's often used as an excuse against community care. So if you could address those three issues, if you can remember those, I'd appreciate it. And I will start with you, Mr. Cooper.
Yes, sir. I'll share with you, I had a conversation with Senator McCain before we broke the scandal. And in his office, we had a pretty good discussion for 15 minutes. And he had a lot of good reasons for why the VA needs to be in existence. And he talked about, you know, severe trauma, PTSD, loss of limb, et cetera, that are unique to the military. But then I reminded him that those casualties that we have and injuries that we have in the military, we now see in the private sector through machines that cause severe damage and also through violence and things like that. So private sector doctors are equipped to handle loss of limb. They're equipped to handle significant PTSD. And ironically, the VA doesn't even offer some of the leading edge techniques that combat PTSD, such as the EMDR therapy. And so I would enjoy to have that conversation with anybody, but no one to date has been able to stand in front of me and give me a valid reason why the VA should exist.
And Grant, if you could answer a couple of those questions, and then I've got one question for Mr. Selnick, and then I'll yield.
Sure. Personally, I have no concerns about community care and the private sector being able to step up and assume more responsibility for veterans care. I don't know where the 80% approval number comes from. I know within my cohort of veterans, it would probably be less than 20%. Not very good numbers. And finally, I think your third question goes back to what Congressman Gates was saying, right? The fact that the VA can't flip the script if they're actually the front door and what is causing community care not to be effective, right? And we can't let them flip the script on that. It's the VA that's holding community care back, not the other way around.
Well, Grant, thanks for that. I got 15 seconds left. Darren, I appreciate all your work and CVA's work. Two questions for you really quickly. One, could you address that polling question? Have you guys done any polling in the field? Are you going to do any polling in the field to help us have some ammunition to go against what is often, I think, sold to us as the greatness of the VA system as opposed to the anecdotal information we get from our constituents, number one. And number two, can you address Secretary McDonough testified to the Senate VA committee last week, pointing to the VA scheduling system as one of the obstacles for veterans getting care in the community in a timely manner. What do you think about that? We're having to deal with all of the computer, issues that are addressing that. Now, yield back.
Thank you for those questions, Representative Ford. Number one, CVA has done extensive polling, and it's been consistent each year. About 89% of veterans want the option of community care, and that's pretty. They want choice. We have and our staff can get you the full survey, because we do ask a lot of different questions about VA healthcare and it's totally different numbers. This is an independent organization. It's not CVA who does the polling and using statistical methods. The reason you get the 80% from VA is VA does its own surveys. You ask the questions you want, you ask the people you want, you get the answer you want. In terms of what the Secretary said with scheduling, one of the problems is, when I get my community care through DOD, I schedule my own appointments. And all veterans could schedule their own appointments, and then you wouldn't have the issue. If you followed the procedure, the way we laid it out in 2019, veterans would get in 2 days, they would get their authorization, and then they would be told they could schedule their own appointments, and then they would quickly be able to get their community care because they could shop around and pick the provider that worked best for them in the time frame that they want. Unfortunately, VA neglects to tell veterans that they can schedule their own appointments and pick any doctor that they want in the network, and that is the real scheduling problem, is that VA wants to control it.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Mr. Roy. And now I recognize the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biggs, and I really do appreciate you putting this on. And as my colleague from Texas stated, we've got 3 members of the Veterans Affairs Committee here, and it's a shame that we're not airing this information right up on the Hill in a committee hearing so that it could be on the record. But we do appreciate you being here. You know, everybody on the committee is focused on making sure that our veterans get their health care delivered when they want it, where they want it. That is the main focus, and we have not been able to achieve that. I talk to a lot. 10% of the population of Montana is veterans, so I've got a very, very large population that I answer to, and the veterans community is having a big problem accessing that care. And yet, when I go to the active military, and we have an incredibly large active military population, obviously, to fill that pipeline of 10% veterans. The active military utilizes TRICARE, and they all rave about it. They go to the doctor that they want to, when they want to, and they get the health care that they need. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why that we have created these 2 separate systems to treat our warriors. I just don't understand it. And so that we're all real clear about the numbers that we're talking about, the Veterans Administration has grown exponentially over the last 30 years. In 1992, the annual budget for the Veterans Administration was $33 billion. $33 billion. And just so we all understand what we're talking about now, their annual budget is about $400 billion. That's how much it has grown. $400 billion.
And the gentleman would yield, that's not adjusting for the impact of the recently passed PACT Act, putting a whole bunch of money into the mandatory spending and then what that will mean on the backfill.
That is correct. That is correct. Right now, today, before we even go into the PACT Act, that's $400 billion. So the funds are available. And I'm sorry that Secretary McDonough isn't here as well, because I've had conversations with him during committee and in my office privately to talk to him about several of the programs that we are having tremendous problems with. And we're watching literally billions of dollars go out the door for a lot of the IT programs that are not delivering any results whatsoever, that he assured us he was not going to perpetuate to other facilities around the country until they were fully functioning, and he has, and yet we have no deliverables. We have no success, and yet we are watching billions of dollars being sent to contractors that somebody must be on a really large boat in the Gulf of Mexico enjoying a good life, because our veterans aren't getting the benefit of those dollars that are being spent. Mr. Selnick, I really appreciate the summary that you gave about the definition of wait time and how it's actually calculated and how in application it comes to be. And whereas a new veteran has like an 87-day wait time, and yet it gets calculated differently once you've already in the system, that you can reduce that down to like an 11-day wait, and I do appreciate that. In a state like Montana that is so large and so rural, a lot of our veterans have to be transported literally hundreds of miles to get to a veterans facility if that's the only thing that's available to them. Therein lies my question. If that's the only thing that is available to them, could you walk us through how the community care program is supposed to work so that when I have a veteran who is 200 miles away from Helena, that he is not forced to go to Helena to receive that care?
Thank you for that question, Congressman. The community care program and the community care eligibility, especially the access standards, was modeled after the DoD TRICARE program. As a TRICARE recipient myself out of Camp Pendleton, I'm very familiar with it as a, not just theoretically, but as a customer. If VA operated the community care program the way DoD operates the TRICARE Prime, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now. Because even at the height of COVID, when I needed to see a dermatologist, the greatest concern for the DoD at Camp Pendleton was getting me an appointment in the community and making sure that it was available. And even at the height of COVID, I was able to see a dermatologist in about 2.5 weeks. So the way it's supposed to work is very simple. If from the date of request, you cannot see, there's not a VA provider that you cannot get an appointment within 20 days for primary care or mental health, or 28 days for specialty, you are automatically eligible for community care if you want it, period. No one needs to talk about it. No one needs to look at it. It doesn't need to go to review board. You are automatically, it's the veteran's choice. That's not happening. For distance, if you are within a 30-minute drive from your residence to where VA provides a service, or a 60-minute drive for specialty care from your residence to where VA provides a service, if you are longer than those times, then you are automatically eligible for community care. So when I see that veterans have wait times beyond 28 days, and they're not told or given the option of community care or their distance, this really is disturbing, because the decision was made, no veteran would have to wait too long or drive too far. So if you're in Montana and they say, hey, you're going to have to drive 100 miles, that breaks the distance, because it's a 60-minute drive for specialty care, and you are automatically eligible for community care and the community care network. Same thing with wait times. So this nonsense, and it happens in Montana, it happens all over the place, where they're making veterans drive hours and hours because they want to keep them in the system. I have been told by staff that if they cannot do you at a medical center, they're going to try to ship you off to somewhere else in the VISN, and only if it's past the VISN will they then actually tell you about community care. And that's an atrocity. But that's the way it's supposed to work, and that's why veterans are being told to drive distances. No veteran should have to drive more than 30 minutes. No veteran should have to drive more than 60 minutes for specialty care. And they're not being told that, and they're not offering it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you again.
Thanks, Mr. Rosendale. And again, before I go, I just want to thank our panel of witnesses and the members of Congress who've come on this very important issue. I think it's been very enlightening. If people are watching this and didn't know much about it, I think they would get a real picture of the issue and the stark contrast. I mean, I appreciate Mr. Gates. I don't disagree with him at all when he gives the proposition of, is this patient too far gone? And I mean, it's the #1 call we receive in my office, and I'd be surprised if it wasn't the #1 call in virtually every congressional office in the country, is how to deal with this. And at the same time, I have veterans that are really quite pleased, quite frankly, with the care they get, but that's a distinct minority of the people that we come in contact, and that's including on my Veterans Advisory Council in the district, who keeps me informed on these issues as well. And I just want to raise a couple of points and then get into this. And you were actually talking about it at the end, but right now there's more than 22 veterans every day who commit suicide in this country, and in many of those cases, it's because they're not getting the health care or the mental health care service that they require to get through the readjustment or the difficulties that they're facing. My own office has intervened in multiple cases and have been able to help save some of the lives of those who were contemplating killing themselves. And this is unacceptable in our society today. And so I'll throw that out as part of the context of this. The next thing is, one thing that you said, Colonel Moody, was that the scheduling and referral process in and of itself is so bureaucratic as to prevent people from being able to have access to the community care that they want. And you throw that into the fact with what Darren was just talking about, Mr. Sullivan was just talking about, when he's talking about that there is a law, as part of the law, that if the wait time is too long, you automatically get in there. If your drive time is too long, if you're too far and you can't get the access, you should automatically have that care. That's part of the reason that I would say that maybe it's too far gone, because we're relying on the Veterans Administration, and they're not really truthful arbiters, because as in every bureaucratic institution, they have an idea of institutional maintenance, that is to preserve the fiefdom that they have created, because it provides money, control, power, and longevity. And so that's really what's happening here. So that's kind of some of the issues that I wanted to raise. But the solution isn't going to your congressman or congresswoman, because you know, we have limited resources, and most veterans don't call us and say, hey, I'm having problems. So one thing that's been put out there is to try to find a way to expand community care. What do you see as the solution, Steve, Mr. Cooper? What do you think is how do you see the solution here? And then I'm going to ask each one of you that as we go forward, because I've got ideas, but I'm not going to have time to explore my ideas. I want to explore your ideas.
Sure, Congressman Biggs, we need a solution, whether it's Social Security for veterans, TRICARE Part V, whatever it's going to be. It needs to be something that allows veterans access to care in the community. I just want to share one final thought. I have heard a lot where veterans or people will often say that some veterans get some good care at the VA. I'm sure there are a few veterans that do get some good care at the VA, but when my case was going to trial, I remember, and we got a lot of media coverage, I remember a lot of families reaching out to me and they would say, my uncle or my father's getting good care at the VA. I don't know what you're talking about. I wish I took a list of those people. Over 100 people since then have contacted me and said, wow, we did not get great care. So I think it's what they don't know, that they don't know that's really going to hurt them. And so because they may go into the VA and a clerk greets them and says, thanks for your service. And they say, hey, your blood work looks great. And they kick them out of the door and they're happy with it. And they ran into a fellow veteran. They think that's good care. Those families are calling me now saying they didn't check for my prostate. They didn't check my PSA. They didn't check for diabetes. They didn't check for my heart issues. And so I think on the surface, you can get some good care if you think you're getting good care. But when you break it down, I think a lot of that good care is really bad care that's just been, covered over.
Thank you. Colonel Moody. Solutions.
Yes, sir. Appreciate the question. One thing I'd just like to add on the process, the front door. It took 6 days between when I requested my first VA PCM appointment until when I actually saw that PCN, which doesn't sound too bad. But then immediately they had to ask for a radiology referral. So every time the buck gets passed, then there's another window of time. I think it's 7 to 10 business days. So now radiology has 7 to 10 business days to get back to me on that referral. And then they're going to pass it over to community care, which is going to be another 7 to 10 business days. Add in the holidays, you can see how this quickly becomes 30 to 45 days before anything actually gets into the community care process. I just mentioned 2 of the recommendations that I would bring forward are around community care access. Is that if you have utilized community care in the past for a specific issue, that you would be able to continue to use that on an ongoing basis. So every time you have to go back in the front door, instead of once you've made it through, you stay on that side with community care. I think that's one smaller fix, but at least moves us in the right direction. And then the second thing, I would just say, if expenses are incurred by an individual veteran that are later referred to community care, that those expenses should be reimbursed. So I ended up paying out of pocket for my MRI, but ultimately was referred to community care, but it would have been 45 days later when they would have had the MRI take place. And so I think that if a veteran has to go forward on their own and pursue that there should be some sort of way for the VA to compensate those veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Selnick. We're out of time, but Mr. Selnick, I'm going to give you just a little bit of time to respond.
Thank you, sir. There's 2 quick ways to solve this in the long term. Number 1 is Representative Biggs' bill, which has the dollars following the veteran. If you have full choice in terms of VA or the community care, it works. We already have that with urgent care. We have no problems with urgent care. So that is one way. And then, frankly, as community care grows, VA needs to shrink. The other way, which is another bill that's been introduced, is to simply say you can have the VA or you can have the TRICARE. TRICARE Select, TRICARE for life. If you had TRICARE Select, you'd have PPO and you wouldn't have any problems. If you had TRICARE for life, that works really well. It's very popular. VA secondary payer. Both of those options I've done the cost analysis, cost a lot less money than what VA is spending. And so the key thing is the veterans should have the choice. The dollar should follow the veteran. And if the veterans are choosing the community, the VA needs to, on the equivalent side, slim down its staffing and its operations so that it all balances out. And in the end, you'll have happier veterans and less money to the government.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate each of you taking time out and sharing your experiences and your thoughts. Very thoughtful, and appreciate each member of Congress who's been here. I offer thanks to the FreedomWorks again for hosting us, and their staff, and OANN for being here and live streaming this. And thanks to my own staff who worked hard on this, particularly Matt Ides. And with that, I'm going to just tell you, I'd encourage. We're not going to get my bill heard. I mean, this Congress, which is unfortunate, but I hope that next Congress we can get that bill heard quickly, get it moved over to the Senate, and get it up on the President's desk, and see if we can help resolve at least some of these problems. Because I tend to agree. I think Matt's right. I think the patient's probably beyond help. But if you put the cash on the back of the patient, the veteran, I think that will actually move us to a freer option. And as that happens, I think you're going to see the Veterans Administration healthcare shrink and more to the private sector, and everybody's going to be happier and get better healthcare and timely and what they need. So, again, thanks to everyone for being here, and with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.